This episode of the Sports Box is brought to you by Mic'd Up Entertainment and DJ Mike Velarde. For all of your event planning needs, make sure you contact Mike at 609-864-5925 and tell him that you saw him on the Sports Box.
And we're back on the air. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the show that is just like swimming in a sewage pit sometimes. This is the Sports Box, where the only opinion that matters is right here. I am Mike Galetta, a.k.a. Hampton Mike, along with my partner, Brian, the Ranger Tar. Brian, back again for another episode.
I'm not speechless too often, but that's sewage, huh?
Yeah, well, sewage could be good for the poor sometimes. It opens it right up, and
It's not my thing, but alright.
Anyway, today we take a stroll down to the NFC South and talk about a team that, in my division, that I'm not too fond of. That's okay, we'll talk about them anyway. They are the Atlanta Falcons. That's right, folks, don't jump off the bridge. The Atlanta Falcons that blew the Super Bowl last year. That's okay, we're going to get into it with a guy who loves Atlanta, not more than Atlanta, but loves the Falcons. We're going to talk to him, and his name is Aaron Sherwood. Aaron, what's up, pal?
Well, what's going on, guys? I'm braced for a beat down, but I'm excited too, so let's go.
Attaboy. So, Brian, as normal, let's talk a little Falcons. Stat me.
Atlanta Falcons, 11-5 record last season, first place in the NFC South, good enough to win the NFC. However, that was the highlight.
Asterisk.
As you may or may not remember, I know a couple people in Atlanta remember this vividly well. They had a 25-point lead late in the third quarter of the Super Bowl and found a way to lose that game. So that's why they're not the defending Super Bowl champions. But, having said that, great year for the Falcons, any which way you cut it.
Yep.
Offensively, they were absolutely stellar. Third-rated passing offense, fifth-rated rushing offense, and they finished with the second overall offense in the NFL. Great numbers. Matt Ryan, almost 5,000 yards, 38 touchdowns, just 7 picks, played the year of his life. Devonta Freeman, over 1,000 yards rushing, 11 touchdowns, just 1 fumble all year, the whole season. Great job by him. One more can I say about Julio Jones, 83 catches, 1,400 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Defensively, not that great. 28th against the pass, 17th against the run, for a total 25th overall. They tried to address that defense in the first round of the draft, took Takkarist McKinley, a guy I really liked, that's actually hoping he goes to the Cowboys, couple picks later. Defensive end out of UCLA, 26th overall. So, Aaron, I'm just going to get this out of my system right now.
I think they're still gassed, the defense.
We're going to move past this as soon as I get this out of my system. How in the blue hell do you have a 25-point lead with 18 minutes left in a football game and find a way to screw that up? I'm going to let you vent, and then we'll get past it.
How do you forget your running backs in that game? That's what I want to know.
Well, a couple of things that I think they took everybody by surprise just to get to that point, including themselves. I don't think they'll ever admit that. As a fan, for 20 plus years, it didn't really surprise me. It was more just a shock that my team, who's let me down on such epic events in the past, such as their previous Super Bowl, would never let that happen. And as it just slowly unfolded before my eyes, it was just, like I said, the only thing I could say is like what a lot of the players, said in their quotes is just shock. Like, it was just, you couldn't believe it was happening. Everybody knew, like, there's no way this can happen, and yet it just happened.
Well,
so there's no excuses. Questionable play calls, I think, no doubt. And, there's been some changes, for both of those things. So, as a fan, you got to move on, otherwise you just jump teams all the time. So, I've supported them all these losing years. My prediction last year was 8-8, so I just try to, focus on the positive, that they outperformed what I was expecting. And I am very intrigued to see how any sort of team recovers, just from such an epic fail.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, Aaron. We talked about that last year in detail. Just how do you, as a professional team, and as those guys that they haven't been there in such a long time, they rose to the occasion, they did everything right, they got to the Super Bowl, they had the #1 team on the ropes, and they let them off the hook. You talk about a guy like Matt Ryan, who, other than last year, was always knocked as being paid as much as he has and not really getting them over the hump. They finally get to the hump. What do you see from him this year? Do you see a really bounce back year? I mean, he had a phenomenal year last year. To have a season like he did last year is going to be, I think, a hard thing to recover, a hard thing to do, considering how that division got better. But what do you see from Matt Ryan for this year upcoming?
Well, I think he's motivated and driven, probably more so than he ever has been. So I don't doubt any sort of fire coming from him as far as leading the team and charging forward and going for victory, stepping on teams' throats at the end of the games where he can. I think that'll all happen. The one concern I have is, does he come out and press too hard now at this point, trying to prove or chase the ghost of that Super Bowl and just start throwing picks because, he's forcing the ball too hard to, either Julio or Sanu, or even, trying to spread it out, like going back to, his fails of the past where he would throw a lot of those short underneath passes and not see linebackers and things like that, and that's where a lot of his picks came from in the past. Last year we didn't see it, and to play at that level consistently, I think, for anybody, is hard. So I think he'll be just as good, but he might try too hard, is where I would say.
Yeah, I mean, you take a look at the numbers he put up. I mean, obviously the best season of his career. Best in completion percentage, best in yards, best in touchdowns, best in interceptions. I mean, he really had the year that I know Atlanta fans have been looking for, pretty much since he got there with a very high pick. And I agree with you. I think the biggest concern for him would be, did he squeeze that bat a little too hard trying to hit grand slams? Because now he just had this great year, and all anybody remembers is the ending. Nobody remembers how great his statistical his season was when you're playing fantasy football. So, They call him Matty Ice, but is he the kind of guy that's going to, from what you've seen from him, is this going to be between the years, the whole year, and is it going to cause the hangover of hangovers for Super Bowl hangover? Because we've never seen a team recover, or not recover, but really deal with anything like this. This is the biggest, obviously, comeback in Super Bowl history. So, do you think the mental makeup of this team is that they can close their mentality, move past it, and look at the season?
No, I think, it's going to be an interesting story to see how it unfolds. I could see him becoming like Aaron Rodgers, even though Rodgers won, and I think that's what allowed him to relax as his career has gone on, and he hasn't been able to repeat. And, another guy that I kind of think of is Steve Young, who played under the shadow of Montana, just, like epic, drive behind somebody. And that's what I'm kind of hoping Matt Ryan pulls from it, is that he's got the drive and he'll have the patience when it's needed not to make those bad, decisions, which he's shown. And actually, even in the Super Bowl, if it wasn't for the sack, I think from my memory of the play tape, that he had either Julio or Sanu deep. And the play was there, and that's how close these things come. And it just, the coin flipped the wrong way for him on that one. And as long as he can keep that thought in his mind and not that it's, bad decisions that are being made or anything like that, and just, make the best play when the moment presents itself, he does come through. Just sometimes it's taken out of your hands.
And just a quick touch on the running game. I mean, obviously it's one of the best in the league. They have two guys back there between Freeman and Coleman who, that talk about a luxury, right?
Yep.
Although, what I will say is I think everyone kind of thought when Coleman first got there, this is going to be more of a timeshare. And I think it hasn't really played out that way. Devonta Freeman has really taken the reins of this job. I mean, Coleman gets his, don't get me wrong, but this is at best a 60-40, a 65-35, where Freeman is the guy. He had a career year last year, a little bit better than the year he had before, which was fantastic, put him on the map. Do you foresee that kind of sticking around for this year, or do you think that Tevin Coleman can burrow his way into a bigger share of that Atlanta run game?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the one thing that's interesting with Coleman is if he ever wants to be a lead back, he has to kind of show that this year. So, again, you should see the drive coming from him. Like, that's what happened with Devonta. He kind of started to see his role get diminished a little bit at the beginning of last year, and that motivated him. He was like, wait a minute, no one's talking about me, getting my 100 yards or scoring all these touchdowns, and then he just exploded. And, Coleman kind of needs that same thing. He needs one. Last year he kind of established himself, where Atlanta fans have known the capability was there since we brought him in. But, now he needs to step it up to the next level, and he needs to take on more of a leadership role. And I don't know if we've ever seen any team that really had two running backs that could really lead the way, especially with the weapons that Atlanta has on the outside as well. I think Devonta has proven that, he is that guy. And, at his size and everything, he reminds me a lot of Warrick Dunn. Maybe even a little bit, harder of a runner between the tackles than Warrick ever was. And the threat on the outside, he's the complete package. Coleman, theoretically could be even better. He's a little bit bigger, he's faster, so he just has to step up and prove it. But he might always be that relief pitcher, that comes in and just spells a superstar running back. I think that's what we'll find out this year with the running backs.
You talk about defense last year. They struggled last year late in the Super Bowl because they were gassed. They were on the field a ton of time last year, and their defense struggled near the end of the year. Moving up 5 spots to take Takkarist McKinley from UCLA defensive end, and then Duke Riley right behind him, linebacker. Is that a big enough help for the Falcons, along with what they did in the offseason, to get this defense not as gassed or a little bit on track of what they're supposed to be?
I think the moves are great. I always worry, since Dimitrov, I would say that he stretches a little bit, but it seems like ultimately over time things do play out. Like you go with Julio. I mean, that trade was, just insane. But over time, no one questions that now, really. And, some of the other moves that he's done as well. But McKinley, I think that was both one, to be a little bit more of an impact, to balance the line out. But they also have depth. A lot of people forgot, the one player who could have been MVP of the Super Bowl was Grady Jarrett.
Yeah.
And so the Falcons' defense is a lot better than they ever get credit for, and they're still young. And I think as they continue to grow together under Quinn, I think the moves that they've made this year, the experience the secondary is now starting to get, with Trufant, who is coming off an injury, wasn't even in the Super Bowl. You got Neal back there. I think they're young, they're fast, they're furious, they're everything Quinn has talked about. I think what we saw for the first half of the Super Bowl was for real, and I think that's what you'll see a little bit more consistently over the season. I don't know if they'll be a top 10 defense by any means, but I think they're going to be much more aggressive, and I think they're going to be known, and people won't really want to play the Falcons as much anymore because of how fierce and fast they'll play, the turnovers, especially in the Dome, especially with the new stadium on top of all that. So I think they got a lot going for them.
Yeah, you talk about that youth, Aaron. I mean, nobody really flew on the radar too is Vic Beasley. He had a solid year last year. He really came on at the end of the year. The one pick though that kind of I'm a little bit confused on is they did in the 5th round take Brian Hill, a good running back out of Wyoming, who I think is going to make an impact. But could that pick could be because Tevin Coleman's coming up on a contract year? Do you think there could be any kind of slide in there? Brian Hill could be taking the place of Tevin Coleman?
I don't know. I think they might be looking at Hill a little bit more special teams.
Yep.
So it's always possible. I mean, the one thing with Atlanta is they're not afraid of the competition. The only spot where they really don't, threaten competition is quarterback.
I say that only because with Warwick Dunn's situation, when that all happened, that's kind of what they did too. They drafted a guy and kind of slid Warwick Dunn right out the door. So I'm thinking that could be Tevin Coleman coming up on a contract year.
Well, actually, Mike, that's a great point. If you want to talk about running back situations, at that time they drafted, I think it was the 8th overall pick, T.J. Duckett.
Yep.
In the 1st round out of Michigan State. They had just signed Warwick, and they had re-signed Jamal Anderson, who hadn't blown out his knee the final time yet.
Yep.
So they actually had 3, potential, all-pro caliber running backs coming into that camp. They ended up leaving with one who was legitimate. Duckett, who was never any more than, a relief player, even though he did perform well when in, just never, found a spot. And Warwick lasted all those years, and had basically a second career in Atlanta. Yep. So, you never know how those running back battles are going to play out. I think that's the one thing Atlanta looks at. So, again, even with Freeman, they signed him, but they could very easily in a year or two turn around and trade him, if Coleman ends up taking over even this year. So, to me, it's always, let me see what you do this season. Let me see if you last, more than anything, and they'll make their decisions from there. I don't think any teams really hang their hats on the running backs other than maybe the Steelers, like they used to.
And I'll give them credit where credit's due. I mean, obviously, they really centered their offseason around fixing their biggest problems. And really, offensively, they didn't really have any. I think Mohamed Sanu's emergence is phenomenal for them because they needed a guy opposite Julio Jones. But defensively, again, they struggled to, give Matt Ryan some support on the other side of the ball. They went out and got Dontari Poe from Kansas City to go with Grady Jarrett, who you mentioned. With Vic Beasley too and Brooks Reed, that's a nice defensive line. I'm sorry, and then Takkarist McKinley as well. I mean, so they definitely have put some assets and some value into that. I think it's the secondary they really need to make sure doesn't hurt them, and they're in a division, with Drew Brees, and with Cam Newton, and with some other guy.
Some other guy named Jameis?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
yeah, he sucks. Don't worry about him.
So, I mean, again, they have 6 games a year against offenses that if they're not really good, they're trending that way. What are your thoughts on if they did enough in the secondary to improve on the 28th ranked passing defense from a year ago, which didn't hurt them, obviously, and they got to the Super Bowl. My team did.
Well, and I think you kind of danced around something that isn't really brought up. When you play in a team or in a division with 3 superstar, potential 5,000-yard passing quarterbacks, some of them dual threats, and yeah, you're 28th in the league on defense and passing with a young, inexperienced defense. I would say that's not too bad. You did better than 3 other teams who probably aren't in that part of the division. And so there's always a different way to look at it, and that's where I think, again, with Quinn, I think he's shown, like in the Super Bowl, again, to me, that was epic. The first half of that, what they were able to do to Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, and the Patriots, with all the packages and how you have to match up personnel. And, I think they'll be okay. I mean, time will always tell. The first 4 games or so of the season, you'll know if anything's wrong with the secondary. But I think with Trufant coming back, he'll be, hungry to prove that, not only the secondary better, but that he should have been in that Super Bowl and could have made a difference if he was there. Neal, I know, is as aggressive as they come at safety. I don't know if you remember him flying all over the field.
Big hitter, yeah.
Yeah, so I think they're going to, be hungry on the secondary side. Their linebackers, I think, are phenomenal. And it's just a matter of the defensive line, can they hold up? And that's where all the rotation and the personnel, sometimes you find yourself in a bad spot and you get burned. You either can't get pressure and then the defense folds. Either that or they'll exploit you because you're too small up front. So I think their defense, like I said, they're not top 10 by any means, but I think you'll see the secondary more, around the 20th, ranked team, and I would say the run defense may be dropping closer to the top 10 because you'll see them hopefully winning games, which means other teams are airing the ball out against them at the end of the games as well, which also
that's actually
your defensive stats.
That's an excellent point. I didn't really think about that. They were winning games last year. They were scoring pretty much at ease, so your defensive numbers against the air are going to look pretty terrible when the entire fourth quarter is the other team throwing the ball. So that's a fair point.
So Aaron, you look at that schedule, and the schedule makers kind of gave them a little bit of leeway in the first part of the year, and I think Murderers Row in the second part. But if you start out at Chicago, which is definitely a winnable game. Green Bay, normally you would say, is kind of a here or there game, but I think in Atlanta is going to be a better fit for them. I think they could definitely win that game. Off to Detroit and then home against the Buffalo Bills. This team could be 3-1, 4-0 going into the bye week, which I think bodes really well for them. But then, like I said, you got Murderers Row in the middle of the season. November 5th, they play the Panthers. They play the Cowboys, Seattle, and then home with the Bucks. But I think they're 4 tough games there. This Atlanta team, it's going to be very critical for them to get off to a good start at the bye week.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, every season for them, at least to be around 500 or so at the midpoint is critical.
Yeah.
In the NFC South. And then, you look at the schedule and it's so loaded, with the divisional games at the back end that, if you're in position, that's when, towards the end there, those other teams aren't, and you can kind of coast a little bit. Whereas if you're not and you got to look up at those teams, it's almost impossible. And yeah, you might win a game just, because it's a rival, but ultimately you might have casualties with injuries or whatever else, going into those things. So it looks okay to me, like schedule-wise. I feel a little more confident this year than I did last year, I would say, where I was looking at 8-8, and Matt really had a lot to prove, which obviously he did. And everything that I'm seeing from the off-season, I'm not going to go overboard, coming off a Super Bowl, especially one that they lost, and say they're going to go 13-3 on a tear or anything like that.
Well, I think what's tough is they're going to have 5 division game or 6 division 5 out of the last 6 games are divisional games, and they got almost back-to-back Bucks and almost back-to-back Saints. So
that is awful.
That's going to be hard. Even the Saints, as bad as they might think they're going to be this year, or it might not be horrible, but they could definitely play spoiler and slow down Atlanta in those last 2 out of 4 games near the end of the year.
Well, I think the way it plays out, though, I mean, early on, I think the schedule makers did them a favor in that if they're going to have a chance to kind of get right after the Super Bowl,
start off well in the first 4. Yep.
They're going to beat the crap out of Chicago in the first game, no question. Yeah. The only tough game, you really like a really tough game in the first 6 weeks is home to Green Bay, and that's going to be a new stadium. I mean, you're getting them in a good spot.
Yep.
But the heart of the schedule, from week 7 to 11. Again, minus the Jets game, which you're obviously going to win, but you're at New England, you're at Carolina, you're hosting Dallas, you're at Seattle, followed up by, as you mentioned, 5 out of 6 division games to end the season.
Yeah.
That's not ideal.
No.
So I really think they kind of got to be 4-1 into that New England game at the worst.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna drop a game here and there out of those division games. I mean, they're always tough. I don't know, but I think that the easy games to start is going to help a team like Atlanta mentally more than anybody, because they're going to want to get back into that rhythm that they were in prior to.
Yeah. Also, getting back to that Super Bowl loss last year. You're sick of hearing about it, but
did you know that the Falcons had a 25-point lead with 3 minutes left in the Super Bowl
against Tom Brady? Against Tom Brady, I forgot to run the ball.
Is that like the biggest upset, like the biggest comeback ever? I'm pretty sure it's got to be, right?
It's the biggest kick of the balls in the front world. But anyway,
I'm sorry.
Anyway, I think factor with that they have to come back from that whole fiasco last year is that they don't have to be the number 1 team in this division, because this division got quick in a hurry. All the teams around them got better. I mean, the Bucks got better in their offseason. Panthers got to bounce back off of last year. And believe it or not, the Saints got Adrian Peterson. They should be a little bit better than they were last year. Maybe that might not be great, but this division got quick in a hurry. So if Atlanta's not the number 1 team, I don't think it kills them. I think they need to get back to the playoffs and get some momentum going into the playoffs, and I think they have to ride the ship. No pun intended with the Bucks.
Well, I would say, as I'm going through game by game, kind of looking at it here and you guys talk, I would say 2 things. There's only 1 game, I would say, on the schedule that is scary to me, that I think that they have the chance of just getting blown out. And that would be the November 20th game at Seattle.
Okay.
Seattle's going to have something to prove, with Atlanta coming to town, especially coming off a home game against the Cowboys. So that game scares me as a potential blowout.
Also, that December 18th game's got scary at Tampa Bay, so I'm just throwing that out there.
Well, actually, Mike, both Tampa games, because then you go, I think they'll be riding high coming into Seattle. Probably maybe even only with 1 loss or maybe 2.
I think it's a split, though, with the Bucs.
Come into Seattle, and depending on how that 2-game stretch goes against Seattle and even coming home against Tampa, they've never really traveled well, and that's coming back across the West Coast. Now I know they'll come all week and everything.
And the Bucs don't travel far for that game either, so that's a plus too.
So that's the stretch to me that's critical, and if they can at least split those 2, especially if they can even take the loss against Seattle and beat Tampa just to prove a point, like they're claiming the division right then and there.
Right.
I think they'll be okay. But if they lose both those games and then potentially drop 1 against the Saints, that's where the season could turn.
Well, what's interesting here is they really, if you look at their schedule from November on, they have 1 cold weather game at Seattle. I mean, so for a team that's a dome team that doesn't really necessarily play well in the elements, it's probably going to be much of an issue for them. I'm going to take an opposite point of view from you, though. You said that you didn't think they had to be the top team in the division.
I don't think they have to.
I'm going to disagree with that, because if you look at the teams around the league, I think the Falcons benefit more from home field than anybody. They're in the top 5 teams that benefit the most from playing in that dome, and they're really a different team when they're playing outdoors. So if they expect to get back to the Super Bowl, it behooves them a lot to get as much home field as possible in that playoffs, especially if you're going to start running into these teams like a Green Bay or like a Seattle, where you may have to go somewhere and play in a really cold weather game that your team's not really built that well for.
And I think Aaron might agree with this too. Going back to Aaron's point too, if they don't win a division, I think the Bucs win a division other than Atlanta. I don't think the Panthers will win a division. I think the Bucs could be up there winning a division. If they win a division, it's only going to be by game. So you have Atlanta going in right behind the Buccaneers with being hungry from last year, trying to prove themselves from what they did in the Super Bowl last year. I think it's going to make them more hungrier to get through the playoffs, even though, like you said, the home field makes a big difference. But I don't think in Atlanta's case, they're going to be hungry to get back there anyway. They got to get in the playoffs to do that, and I think they're going to be, like Aaron said, hungrier than ever to get there. Aaron, do you agree with that?
Well, but I think they need a 1 or 2 seed more than anybody. If they end up as a wild card, have to go into Green Bay or Seattle that first game, this thing's going to end pretty quick.
As the number 1 wild card, I don't think it hurts them though. I really don't.
It depends,
Aaron, do you agree?
It depends who that 4 seed is.
Yeah.
If the 4 seed's an outdoor game in cold weather
It could be, yeah,
in January, that is not an that historically the Falcons have done well in. Kind of like the Bucs. They couldn't win a cold weather game forever.
Yeah.
They finally beat the
Eagles
Eagles in
Philly,
too.
beat the Eagles, yeah.
So, again, I think Green Bay can win a game somewhere else.
Do we have somebody on the line?
Aaron.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know for a while. We were going back and forth. I didn't know.
Aaron,
I think there's some truth to that, but
yeah.
I think, Atlanta's made exceptions too, like marching up to Green Bay, in years past and winning, in freezing temperatures against Brett Favre, and that was in the playoffs. So they have done it, but I think it's always a case by case because they struggled against Philly, where Tampa did beat Philly, so. That one's a tough one. You really got to look at those cold weather teams and see who they are and how they're built, themselves.
I think this year it's going to come down to December 18th at the Bucs on that Sunday night game, 8:30 for the division winner to see who's going to decide the winner. I mean,
yes.
Even though with 2 games left, they have the Saints and the Panthers, the Falcons, but I think it's going to come down to that game to see because they're both going to be there at the end. I think, especially with the firepower the Bucs are bringing this year. So we will see. It should be very interesting. So, Aaron, we'll put you on the spot. What do you think for your Falcons record-wise? What do you look at?
I would say 10-6. I'll play it safe.
Wow. Okay.
Kind of anticipating some Super Bowl hangover, maybe an injury or two at some point in the season, which could throw a couple games.
Okay.
But ultimately, definitely a return trip to the playoffs. I do think they reclaimed the division. And I'm not going to say Super Bowl or bust, but I think they'll be right back in the thick of the NFC Championship. And then it's like a coin flip.
I think if the Bucs go 9-7, they'll win that division with this firepower. I'm slit my wrists.
Yeah, I mean, it's a decent number. I don't know that 10 wins a division.
No.
And I look at the Bucs as an example. I mean, unless they have a tie and the tiebreaker goes to Atlanta.
I think 11 or 12.
I think you might need 11 to win the division, but we'll see.
Yeah, you'll see. Should be very interesting. So, well, that's all the time we have for the Atlanta Falcons, the Super Bowl hangover team. By the way,
did you know?
What happened?
Yeah.
What happened? I missed
I've already played that card.
I slipped into a coma.
I played that card 6 times. I'm not going for 7.
Oh my God. Anyway, thank you for watching. We appreciate it. Of course, we always joke around with him, but we always have fun with him. Aaron Sherwood on the line talking Atlanta with us. Aaron, thank you very much, my friend, talking Atlanta with you. It's always a pleasure.
Yep, same here, fellas. Take it easy.
Just keep the sharp instruments out of his hand right now.
I felt genuinely bad for you. That night. I mean, I did.
I can't wait for Redbird to get back on.
I just want to know, seriously, where are all the Atlanta fans that were like cursing at me and calling me stupid, this, that, and the third? Like,
well, they're not watching Braves games because they're not selling out either. So anyway,
we'll be bleeding red in the dome this year. That's where we are.
It is an impressive looking building. I'll give them that. It is
great. Well, they have the building. They should run the ball a little more. Anyway, thank you for watching. We really appreciate it. You can always get us on social media if you need to.
As you know, this is one of a preview we're doing for every NFL team. We haven't gotten yours yet. Maybe we did. You don't know because you don't follow us on Facebook and Twitter. So go ahead and join the party. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at SportsBox Show. And for God's sake, subscribe to the YouTube channel because you're going to miss your team and you're going to be upset about it.
I'll tell you. And we need Redbird to write back in. Give some comments, pal. Let us know how we're screwing up the Atlanta team this year.
Did you know?
Yeah, anyway. Thank you for watching. We appreciate it. And that's Sports Box. The only opinion that matters is absolutely right here. Atlanta should take a tip out of it.
You know what? If we had the lead with 25-point lead, we probably would close that bitch out, right?
Oh, my God. Yeah, I would have ran the ball a little more. Thank you for watching, Steve.
1, 2, 3.
Don't forget to subscribe.